The chair calls the committee back to order. Before we're going to resume in just a few minutes or seconds to Representative Keeler, but before we do, Chair Scott is asked to say something. So Chair Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And members, I can hear, the room isn't quite as full now. I can hear it a little bit better. But I wanted to just address a few things because you had some questions about process, and I learned a great deal in the break from people that work within the schools and learned a lot about process. First of all, on the physical that the high school league has, that and I'm like thinking back, oh yeah, my kids had that form. You have this form, you take it to the doctor fills it out. One of the questions on the form is it asks for the physical sex at birth. So that is a question that's on the form. Right now, when there's a question of a kid's age or a kid's residency, those are all issues the high school league deals with. And I think, and this is what I wasn't quite understanding Representative Falconer talking about, you know, in hockey and how they will challenge all these things. And they do challenge the age of any given hockey player or the residency. And it's done on a fairly regular basis is what my understanding is. And so the process, each school kind of decides how they're going to handle that. But for the most part, if there's a challenge to that student, they still play on the team until an investigation is done and it's determined otherwise. Like with age, they could show a birth certificate, right? So there are ways that maybe that. And these physicals, just a second. So the physicals, when they come back from the doctor's office, the ADs have those on file. So the ADs have this information. And so they would have the information too, proving the age of the child and all these other things, the age of the athlete. So these things are decided after an investigation when there is a challenge. And so this would be operating under that same process. Is there anything else? Was there a question? I don't think so. I think there was a lot of question about the data and the health data. It's all contained on the form that goes back to the AD from the doctor's office on the physical. And just like any other student data, that's kept private. So I hope that clears up some of the questions about process. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair. I know we've asked a lot of questions, and usually we go back and forth. So if you have anybody on your side, they can ask questions, and then I can go. Oh, you don't have any members on your side that want to ask?
You're next on the list.
Okay, thanks. Well, first I'll say one of the testifiers brought up a really good point, that this will not become law. Because as we know, we have to have 68 votes on the floor, and this won't. And so I'm interested on when the committee will actually start doing some bipartisan work so that we can get to work and doing some actual good policy that we can turn into law for our students. I know that Representative Lawrence and I have been working on some bipartisan work and put in the ask. And so would like at some point in this committee that we can get to some bipartisan stuff. But to the bill, I have a couple questions. One is about the sports physicals. So I'm going to lean into that a little bit more. In the bill, it says that this would be for elementary. It's including elementary students. Many of your testifiers talked about competitive sports. And so my first question is, what competitive sports would we have at an elementary level?
Chair Scott?
My understanding is that this does govern all those sports, whether they're school sanctioned or not. And there are still physical forms, I believe, that a parent, it may be a simple card for a 3 or 5-year-old. I know when my kids played like city league sports and stuff like that, they had to fill that out. This bill does not prohibit co-ed teams. My kids played on co-ed soccer till they were, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6. This doesn't prohibit that. And so the only time that it would come into question, I think, is if when there's a team that's exclusively for girls, as laid out in Title IX, when a team is exclusively for girls, and there's a question about one of the players as to whether they're a girl or not.
Representative Keeler?
Thank you, Chair. It doesn't really answer my question, I guess, because so sports physicals are not a K through 12 thing. By law, sports physicals are 7 through 12. And so I'm just interested, you're leaning into the sports physical is where we're gonna get the identifier for. But if it's by law that we only do sports physicals for grades 7 through 12, and you don't do a card for third graders. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever had a third grader in a sport. And so I'm just trying to ask if the physical form, the sports physicals, are what we're utilizing for competitive sports, because that's what your testifiers are saying. That's what all the stories were saying. It's not about Pee Wee basketball. It's about competitive sports and losing their opportunity, if I heard right. How are we going to do that in an elementary level? Because right now there's no data protections. There's nothing there in line. There's not an AD at an elementary level. So I'm wondering, your bill is talking about an elementary level, and I'm just wondering how in the parameter of that working, if the sports physicals don't go down to kindergarten, how would K through 6 go through the process?
Chair Scott.
Madam Chair, thank you. As I laid out, if it's not a co-ed team going in, and everybody knows it's going to be boys and girls on the same team, if there was a question as to the sex of a child that wanted to play on an all-girls team, then the coach or the athletic association would have to come to some agreement and have a policy on that, which I'm sure they already have. We don't have to lay out every minuscule little detail in process. The stuff that I laid out, the high school league, that's not in law anywhere that I know of. It's not in statute. So we don't have to lay out every single little detail. But I think if there's a question, and then that's where they're going to have to prove that that child is a male or female.
Representative Keeler, follow up.
So we talk a lot about data, and I actually ask you a lot of questions about protecting data. You just mentioned that in the AD world with the sports physical, again, grades 7 through 12, there are parameters that information is protected. Tell me what actual data parameters we would have around that, or are we just saying that anybody in a crowd who's attending a third grade basketball game could look at a kid, because we know this happened in Nebraska with an 8-year-old who got pushed to the side of the soccer tournament because they looked too manly or too male, and it was a girl, born a girl, not an issue. And so I'm just trying to figure out how this would work in an elementary school. Like, I'm a mom of a kid who's playing soccer, and so I'm trying to understand, if we don't have the physical, and you're saying that we just have somebody in the crowd that can say, oh, I'm questioning that kid, and then we have to go through this process, how is that data going to be protected then, if there's not an already physical structure? Oh, thanks. But you could hear me, right? I feel like, okay.
Chair Scott.
Madam Chair, thank you, and Representative Keeler. Again, I think we're getting into details that aren't, first of all, there may not be any data. I mean, at some point, a coach is probably going to have to take somebody's word for it, but I don't know if my legal person here has an answer for that, but I don't want to make this harder than it is, and more complex than it is, because I think that there are processes in place right now for when that happens. You know, I don't know if any of you have had kids on traveling squads for athletics or whatever, and a lot of times it's younger kids, and there may be people challenging a kid's age, challenging a kid's gender, and sex. So there's a process in place for it now. I'm sure I don't have anybody here from an athletic association to answer that question, but I'm sure that it happens now.
Representative Keeler.
Thank you, Chair. That creates a lot of anxiety and worry that we just don't know how elementary data, or if we're asking somebody to prove what gender they are, that where would that data be stored? How would that data be used? So I do think we need to look at that. If it is really about competitive sports, I think that lives a little bit more in the secondary education around where the sports physicals come in. I just want to put that on record, that I just don't think that we're protecting the littles data the best. But so kind of what from you're saying then is that people could just look at an individual and from, like I heard people say like, our eyes will tell us who the girls and the boys are. Like, I just want to make sure that then that's what we're utilizing. We're just utilizing a visual moment for somebody in a crowd to determine that that could be a different gender.
I think if you look at the entire, Madam Chair, thank you. Madam Chair and Representative Keeler, if you look at the entirety of Chapter 121A, you will see what the heart of that chapter is. This is in keeping with that chapter. The chapter is about giving opportunities to female athletes because they've been denied in the past because of their sex. Sex is not defined in current statute. We're defining what a female is here. The rest of the statute stays in place as is. And in case you were wondering, there is rulemaking that goes into all this. So I think we're getting a field on a rabbit trail here that isn't really pertinent. I don't know what they're doing with the data now. I don't know. But they've got to have some way of keeping a kid's data is their name, their address, their phone number, their email address. What are these athletic associations doing now with that data? Under this 121A, I can guarantee you that there's a policy around it. Again, it may not be written in the statute, but as you know, there's rulemaking that goes along with statute.
Representative Keeler.
Thanks, Chair. Representative Scott, I find it interesting that you would not have dug into data around a bill that's your bill, because you dig into data a lot about the bills that are our bills.
No data, Madam Chair. There's no data provision. There's no Chapter 13 citation in the bill. So there was no data to dig into.
Rep. Keeler.
Thank you, Chair. I think if we're going to start diving into gender at birth about kids, that would, in my mind, lean into data. But I'll move on to some of the other questions I have. So when we're identifying what a female is, in the new language you used, which I do appreciate that we're not examining genitalia of kids anymore in the first portion of this bill, but I just want to clarify that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I just want it to be on record that it feels like part of this language is saying that a female is only a female who at some point produces, transport, or utilize eggs for fertilization. What we know is 11% of the population who are born as women are born infertile, which if we do the math, 11% of the population in Minnesota is like 300,000 people that we have in Minnesota that wouldn't be eligible for girls' sports because of how we're identifying what a woman is. I just think that that's really, I think it could lead into some question. But back to like, we're just gonna look at somebody and point them out is what this always comes down to, is just looking at a kid and deciding that we need to question who they are and where they are and how they're showing up. We know that this happens with age a lot. We know that and it's used as a tool in competitive sports. I don't know if any of you have been in competitive sports, but what happens is you're in a championship game or something's going on, and I'm like, Representative Lawrence looks older than he is in this structure. And then all of a sudden, right?
Yes, please.
And then all of a sudden, your age is in question, right? And that's probably not everybody else's. Some kids are taller than other kids. Some kids are just bigger than other kids, right? And so we do that by visibly looking at somebody. What I'm worried about is the bullying impact that this will have. We talk about protecting girls' sports. And I am an athlete through and through. I played sports all throughout high school and in college, so I'm with you on that. What I'm nervous about is every single individual who testified today that was an athlete had some sort of element. And I just want to go through, and I want to do this as just a real-time example of somebody from a crowd could just look at somebody in front of them and identify and question if they're actually the gender that they say they are. We had testifiers today that had larger Adam's apples than others. We had some that had hair on the top of their lips, some that showed up that had broader shoulders. One even mentioned that there was a friend they had that was 6'3". That's rather tall for a girl. We have people that showed up to testify that had different jaw structures. So you're saying that we could challenge, just anybody here could challenge any one of those girls at any point in time and say, you're lying about your gender. And then we're just supposed to trust who then to determine if that was real or not, because this opens it up for, this is more harmful for sports in the long run, because what will happen is you guys have a great basketball team, but you guys have really tall girls, taller than average girls. So now your opposing team, anybody from their team can come and say, you three are all taller than average. You must have been born a boy. You're inappropriate. You're not showing up in the right gender. So walk me through how a situation like that happening, because the stories that we saw coming from like Utah, and I don't know, did you look at that story after that was shared earlier, that it was that a school board member just randomly picked a kid out of the crowd because they were a different size, and they're in a lawsuit now because of that. And I don't want that to happen here. We have a growing amount of young girls that are actually going into sports. We know that it's suicide prevention. We know all of these things. So walk me through how in that scenario and in that way, like that wouldn't happen here in Minnesota if this were ever to become law. Because I am sure all of the moms and everybody who came and talked about loving their kids and having, daughters in the future don't want the general society to be looking at their kids on a court or a field and say, you kind of look like you could maybe have been a boy. Like that just leads it up for, that's a lot of discrimination that could happen. That's a lot of bullying that can happen to any of our kids. And that's what I'm really worried about is the integrity of all of us and bullying that can happen in our sports arena. So walk me through how you're sure that would not happen in the state of Minnesota in our sports arena.
Chair Scott, would you like Dr. Simons to comment on the definition question first, or do you want to take?
Madam Chair, yeah, I would like to have the physician answer that question first, and then I'll go to the rest of the question.
Dr.
Madam Chair,
Simons.
so you brought up the question about infertility, and you suggested that would not make that person female. So the same argument would apply if a person was born without an arm or leg. They're still a human. So sex is defined by our reproductive strategy. So female sex has a reproductive strategy for eggs. Male sex has a reproductive strategy for sperm. And so what I talked about earlier, there are certain disorders of sexual differentiation where that body plan doesn't go according, there's a disorder. In the same way as a person is born without a limb or something like that, you would not say they're not human.
Thank you. And Chair Scott, did you want to answer the other
Yeah, I mean,
issue?
I think we're getting caught on these rabbit trails because what we're offering here is definitions and just reiterating what's already in statute. So if there are processes now for what you laid out, for challenging a kid's age, for challenging a kid's gender, there are processes laid out. I can guarantee you there are processes within the Minnesota State High School League. There are processes within athletic associations that our kids are in now. None of that's going to change. This bill is about preserving what's in Chapter 121A. It's about preserving girls' sports for females. The only reason, again, that we add a definition of female here is because it's been in question for the last few years. So like, okay, we'll define what a female is, even though throughout the statute, it talks about the sex that has been denied opportunities in the past. 7 times it mentions that, and that's females. So I think you're getting off on a rabbit trail that has nothing to do with the bill. But I will have Ms. Carlson, she might have some input on this.
Sure, Ms. Carlson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative, a few things. I was just thinking, you said quite a bit there. I mean, first of all, I just go back to the fact that what many testifiers have already reiterated is that there are physical exams present now in sports. The law is not very clear about exactly that process, but there is a process. So I just say there are already physical exams. That's what I heard Dr. Simon said. That's what I heard Dr. Odom say, and that's what I heard another doctor who testified to. And I'm thinking, any doctor would say that before you play sports, you have to check out to make sure that you're healthy. But members, what we do know is that 70% of the population believes that males do not belong in female sports. And I'm glad that you brought up bullying, because there is a concern. No student should ever be bullied. But the issue here is that girls who are forced to play with males and lied to and not told that they're actually competing against somebody who has a physical advantage over them, who harms their safety. We've heard of, you were talking about articles, we've heard of Peyton McNabb, who got a concussion. She was concussed because a male was playing on a female volleyball team. This is a lie to women, and arguably that is that should be a concern within the provisions of 121A in the anti-bullying statute.
Representative Keeler, follow up.
Well, now I'm kind of confused because earlier you said 80%, and now you just said 70%. So like, I mean, we're just trying to figure out where your numbers are and what's relevant or not. So I won't ask any more questions, and I am going down a rabbit trail on the bill because I do think it's really harmful, and I think that the actual impact that this would have is actually more detrimental to just girls who want to play sports because people will be looking at them and trying to identify them for them. And it doesn't seem like there's real parameters to protect elementary kids, which as a mom of an elementary kid, that makes me really, really concerned. I just think this bill isn't ready, and it's not going to become law. We're just wasting time really talking about a hateful topic. So thank you.
Representative Bierman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it. This little, well, the bill has a lot of issues, a lot of challenges ahead of it. Minnesota Human Rights Act, constitutional issues. But what we just heard with Representative Keeler's questions were some of the things that in this little interim break where I had time to walk around and reflect on my experience as well in coaching kids from 5th grade to 8th grade. And I was thinking most specifically about the 5th graders that I met and coached, since they don't get that same physical exam thing going on. There's a lot of questions when you have an array of kids who are at very different levels of development. And I remember kids who were very tall compared to other ones, and then there were kids who played basketball obviously a lot and were quite adept and were very skilled versus other kids who, you had to teach them starting with a layup. So you have all these kids, a very different level of players. You have players who can take a rebound in 5th grade and dribble the length and put it in the basket. And then you'll get parents, when you think about elementary, the competitiveness isn't from the kids, it's from the parents. And they're into the game and they want to win, and they don't want to listen to playing all kids equally just to give them some experience and time sometimes. They want to win, and they would come down to the bench and they would add their 2 cents, and they would ask me if that kid on the other team is older and why is she on the team. And so I remembered these things as I was walking around here today. So I think the discussion is truly, with this bill, it should be spelled out in the bill, a bill like this. I know you like to refer to it as a rabbit hole. It is, there's details here. And a bill like this needs more details. It's a one-page bill. We could, add a page and flush this out a little bit more. It would be, I think, helpful to everybody. The questions I had were numbers again. This is one of the first questions I had when I thought about this bill was, in Minnesota, how many student athletes are we talking about? Do you, Representative Scott, do you have any question or any knowledge of the actual numbers of student athletes that this would affect?
Chair Scott.
Chair Bennett, thank you for the question. No, I don't have any of those numbers. I don't think that data is kept anywhere.
So no data?
Representative Bierman.
No data.
No data. Or even,
Representative Bierman.
Chair Bennett, thank you. No even numbers that where people are contesting it, or, in sports here in Minnesota? Nothing at all?
Chair Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know where any of that data would be kept in
Okay.
one place. If you can point me to that area, I would get that number for you, but to my knowledge, it does not exist.
Representative Bierman.
And
Or sorry.
Madam Chair.
Scott.
But you did check, like with high schools or high school league or somebody?
Chair Scott.
No, I did not, because I don't think,
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll move on. Thank you. Madam Chair, so I'll just put out there that I was watching a hearing, a federal hearing, and they talked about this issue, and they said there were 510,000 college athletes, and they asked them how many of them are trans, and they said less than 10. So I'm just curious, these numbers might make a difference, something to consider anyway. At least to know the scope of the problem. You know, we talked here earlier, a testifier said, you're the health committee, you should be working on, or you're the education policy committee, you should be working on education issues, and it seems like we're off the track with this bill. I think the only other thing, the concern I have, Madam Chair, is just the potential expense of the testing if we just move this bill along, and you know, who's going to make up these rules and how is that going to come out? I think there's going to be a lot of issues and, you know, attorneys involved here as far as trying to determine this. So the bill is not ready. The bill should not be moving forward, and I'll be a no vote. Thanks.
Lead Jordan, would you like to wrap this up before the author closes?
Yeah, Madam Chair, thank you. I have a few questions. And one of them is related to the Minnesota Human Rights Act. We heard testimony from the Department of Education that this is in conflict with that act. I am familiar with that act and that it exists. I know you are the chair of the Judiciary Committee, which, to Chair Scott, does the Judiciary Committee have purview over the Minnesota Human Rights Act and the Human Rights Department?
Chair Scott.
thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Jordan, it does.
Lead Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So why is this bill not going to the Judiciary Committee then, if there are significant questions about not only the Human Rights Act, but also some of these data questions?
Chair Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Jordan, if you can show me on the bill draft the section that is either Chapter 13 or Chapter 363A, which is the Human Rights Act, that would require this to come to my committee, please point that out.
Lead Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We heard that this conflicts with that act, and we're not the experts on that. I think your committee needs to be looking at this and asking those questions. And I did speak to DFL lead Liebling, who is the DFL lead on the Judiciary Committee, and she agrees that this bill absolutely, because of the interactions with the Human Rights Act, needs to come to the Judiciary Committee. So is there a reason why? Just because it's not necessarily referenced, or it interacts with that act, and that's the act that's under your committee's purview. So why not take it to your committee and use it? That's why we're asking, I mean, I think that's why people are asking these data questions, is because this bill's headed to the floor. I mean, what's the rush? Why can't it be examined by the experts in both data and human rights?
Chair Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, there's no Chapter 10 reference or Chapter 13 reference in the bill. There's nothing in this or the underlying statute, 121A, that has anything to do with data. And neither does it have Chapter 363A, human rights. This is a bill specifically that addresses 121A, which is Minnesota's kind of like their Title IX, right? And it is directed not at employment and equal opportunity. It's addressed in education statutes. That's why I'm setting this committee. This is all education statute. The only other reference in the bill is to 128C, which is also, that's the Minnesota State High School League chapter. That's all this bill does.
Lead Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when we say that it's notwithstanding any law to the contrary, would that be, sorry, we will go over going through the chair. We're all new here.
Wait,
I did
I
call on
can't
you.
remember.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you.
okay.
Apologies. It says notwithstanding any law. I think that is a reference to the Minnesota Human Rights Act. And I think with that, I would make a motion to refer this to the Judiciary Committee, and I would ask for a roll call, Madam Chair.
1 second. Sorry, I've been going up and down so much, I don't even know where I'm at. Try that again. Representative Jordan moves to amend the motion to re-refer House File 12 as amended to the Committee on Judiciary, Finance, and Civil Law. All those in favor say, I'm sorry, oh, and we will have a roll call, Representative Jordan, I'm sorry. So here we go.
Chair Bennett,
No.
Vice Chair Mueller,
Mueller votes no.
Lee Jordan,
Aye.
Bierman,
Aye.
DePel,
No.
Falconer,
Aye.
Fogelman. No. Gordon. No. Green.
Aye.
Hill.
Hill votes aye.
Keeler.
Keeler, aye.
Lawrence.
Lawrence votes no.
Roach.
Roach votes no.
Okay, there being 7 ayes in
Sorry,
favor,
other way.
6, right, hang on,
6 ayes.
okay. Being 6 ayes and 7 nays, the motion does not prevail, and the current motion remains to place House File 12 as amended on the general register. Representative Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And then another question I have, Chair Scott, is you mentioned that there's rulemaking associated with this bill. I'm not seeing a fiscal note, and we're not a fiscal committee, so is this bill going to be going to Education Finance to examine any rulemaking money that it's going to go to the Minnesota High School League or MDE or any other entity that will be engaging in that rulemaking that you referenced?
Chair Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The plan is not to send it to Education Finance. If there's any rulemaking that outside of, I can't imagine really, honestly, what rulemaking they're going to have to do. Everything's already in here. All they're going to have to do is figure out this definition. That's the only substantial change. So I don't think that the rulemaking would probably amount to much, if anything. It's probably something that normally the Department of Education or the High School League could absorb.
Thank you. And also Representative Jordan, we just discussed this with Chair Krishan. He said he does not need to see this bill. Representative Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if there is costs associated with this bill, we're just not going to address that? How are we going to account for any costs that are associated with this bill if we don't know what the costs are? We're just going to ask the High School League and the department to absorb those costs?
Chair Scott?
Thank you, Madam Chair. According to the Chair Bennett, Representative Krisha has already been asked if he needs to see this bill, and he said no. He knows more about education finance than I do, so I'm guessing he would know whether that bill needs to come to his committee or not for a few lines of rulemaking, potentially.
Lee Jordan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe the hour is late. I'm not trying to draw this out. But so I'm hoping you can, in your final comments, can address whether or not you did request a fiscal note. I know that's something that's very important to all of us is understanding the costs of bills. And so I'm hoping that one has been requested and one will be forthcoming. And perhaps that'll be something that we can work on re-referring if there is a fiscal cost associated with it. But, there are, as other people have said, there are real problems. And there are real problems in girls' sports. I'm a fan of women's soccer, not playing it myself, but I like to watch it. And the U.S. women's national team has won World Cups more than any other team. But they didn't achieve pay parity with men who, to my knowledge, have not really won ever in soccer. They didn't achieve that pay parity with those losers until about 2 years ago, despite being world champions. There is real issues with assault that girls and women face. And the other thing, too, is that there are real problems that our transgender Minnesotans face and Americans face. 80% of trans people have faced discrimination. 57% of people agree that transgender people face more discrimination than other people. And that's what this bill is. This is a bill about real discrimination against the trans community in Minnesota, and specifically girls. We said that another quote you said is that you don't want to make this more complicated than it is. Well, you did that by introducing a bill that is requiring all of these rabbit holes. The Minnesota High School League has had a policy in place for the past 10 years that says let kids just play sports. Girls get to play sports. Girls get to play sports on girls' sports teams. That's the current policy, and it's not that complicated. And it's being managed just fine. You know, it's really, your bill is what is creating this uncertainty and this division. This has been the law for 10 years. This has been what the Minnesota High School League has had, and it's fine. It's working because girls are playing sports, and that's what's important. That's why we had to pass a law that has taken 50 years to produce athletes like Simone Biles, like Caitlin Clark, that we're all so proud of. And this bill is not going to help girls in sports. It's just going to prevent a few kids from playing sports on the team that matters to them. And so I also just want to let everyone know that this bill will not become law in Minnesota. We will all be voting against it, and I want people to know how I voted today, and I want people to remember it forever. So I will be asking for a roll call to put this on the general register because I want that in the history books how I voted. I also want people to know that trans people exist. They have always existed, and that's really beautiful, I think. And I'm sorry that we spent time on this bill because this bill will not become law because there is not support for it in the Minnesota House. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Jordan. And Representative Jordan has requested a roll call, and we will do that when the time comes. Before we go to Chair Scott for her closing, I just want to thank members on both sides of the aisle and those who are left here and watching. Thank you for being respectful. This is a very passionate subject on all sides, and I think you all handled it really well, and I thank you for that. And everybody's comments have been duly noted, and I know we were mostly silent on this side, but we just kind of wanted to give you the opportunity to flesh this out the way you wanted, and we appreciate how it was all handled. And before we close, I wanted to just share a quick personal story, because this is personal for me, and this is going to date me now, but when I was in 9th grade, that's when Title IX passed. That was quite a few years ago. And it's my generation and those generations before that fought hard to have girls and women's only sports. And for a very good reason. And when I was in 12th grade, because it took a while once it was signed, there was various things that happened for it to really come into action. As a 12th grader, as a senior in high school, I participated on our high school's very first girls basketball team. We had our own sport, and I was, believe it or not, very shy and withdrawn at that age, and I joined that team along with other girls, and it was one of the best things for me, and I went on to play in college, which is why I have a wrecked knee right now, but that's another matter. It meant a lot to me, and had boys been able to play on my team when I was a 12th grader, I know I wouldn't have done it. And you can imagine how really unskilled we girls were, who had never grown up playing basketball really, except maybe with our brothers a little bit. We didn't play well, but we loved it. And it's just important to have fairness and safety in this situation. We fought hard to have girls' sports, and if we don't define this now, girls' sports will turn into nothing. It will not be girls' or women's sports anymore. And that's why I'm pretty passionate about this myself, because it was a big deal to have our first girls' basketball team. So Chair Scott, thanks for letting me say that, and I'm gonna have you close this out here, and then we will have a roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just for the record, Representative Jordan, Ms. Carlson be more than happy to answer some of your questions about the notwithstanding language before we get going on the closing. But thank you for the discussion today. And this bill is really not all that complicated. It's reiterating what current law is in Chapter 121A. It's saying that only girls, only female students can play on female teams. And then we go on to define what a female is. It doesn't change anything about the data. It doesn't change anything about the Human Rights Act. But when Title IX and associated state laws were passed, they were passed to address a real problem. Past inequities or lack of equal opportunity for girls in extracurricular and competitive athletic programs. The question was very straightforward. Should girls enjoy the same opportunities as boys in athletics? And Title IX's answer to that question was a resounding yes. However, when Title IX was passed, no one would have imagined biological males forfeiting their well-established privileges in athletic accommodations to then don the cloak of a female and use the rights established for women to muscle women on the podium and deny women their right to fair play. I ask for your support. We need to protect our girls. We need to protect girls and girls' sports. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chair Scott. And the chair renews her motion that House File 12, as amended, be placed on the general register. A roll call vote has been requested. The committee legislative assistant will take the roll.
Chair Bennett.
Aye.
Chair Mueller.
Mueller votes yes.
Lead Jordan.
No.
Bierman.
Bierman, no.
DePel.
DePel votes yes.
Falconer.
No.
Fogelman.
Yes.
Gordon.
Aye.
Green.
Votes no.
Hill.
Hill votes no.
Keeler.
Keeler, no.
Lawrence.
Lawrence votes yes.
Roach.
Roach votes yes.
There being 7 in favor and 6 against, the motion prevails, and House File 12, as amended, is placed on the general register. Members, that concludes today's agenda. Thank you all very much, and our next meeting will be Tuesday, February 25th. With that, the committee stands adjourned.